Thank you for downloading this podcast from the British Theatre Guide. For more information about British Theatre Guide, please visit britishtheatreguide.info. Theatre company Told by an Idiot was nearing the end of a tour with its show The Strange Case of Charlie Chaplin and Stan Laurel when the theatres were closed due to the coronavirus pandemic. However, it will be one of the first theatre companies to resume performances to live audiences when it takes part in the Greenwich+Docklands festival in Woolwich, Eltham and Thamesmead in August and September 2020. For this festival, the company will revive its family show Get Happy at outdoor venues including a basketball court and an island. I spoke to Told by an Idiot founder Paul Hunter, who is directing the piece, during rehearsals, and I started by asking him what it was like to finally get back into a rehearsal room.
It feels in many ways an achievement to even get to this stage, to be honest, to given what we're all going through, to actually 3 months ago have the idea of reinventing the show for outdoors. And now actually to be in rehearsal, that in itself feels like a massive journey. Obviously, when we first came in on Monday, the beginning of the day, and the focus was very much on how do we keep everybody safe and how do we keep the room safe,
Yeah.
And all the natural things that you normally do in rehearsal, seeing old friends and everything, you couldn't greet in the same way. And so it was a weird mix of things that felt very strange, but also very familiar. And in some ways, it felt quite emotional, the fact that we all managed to pitch up there in our masks and our whatever socially distant journeys and everything. But then I think theatre's an odd thing, isn't it? Because obviously you've been with us forever, telling us stories and stuff and sitting around a fire however you do it. Once we got started, it felt quite quickly strangely familiar. So it's not that you forget the fact that you're being temperature checked and, all this going into the building, but the actual nuts and bolts of doing the rehearsal felt like, oh, yes, this is what we've always done.
Yeah.
And particularly for Told by an Idiot, our work has always embraced fully the notion of a live event, and it comes out of spontaneity and improvisation. And so it feels a very natural progression. Years ago, before the company, when I was a young actor, and I'd had one paid gig, and then I hadn't got any work, and I thought, oh, welcome to show business.
Yeah.
I rehearsed something in my back garden with my mates, and we got someone else involved, and we used to go off to Portobello Market on a Saturday afternoon and do this show in the street. So it doesn't feel very new. In some ways, it feels almost
back to your roots.
Part of in a way. And it's, a bit like those unplugged albums,
Yeah.
when you suddenly see a band go back to something very simple. And in some ways, you can capture something that lies at the heart of something, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, and it'll be quite something to get in front of an audience again, won't it?
Oh my gosh, yes. I mean, we've got a few kind of next week. We're on the top of the building where we're rehearsing, so we're outdoors, so we get a flavour of the outdoor space. And I think there's a plan that some families who are at the building might come and have a little look as well. So tentatively meeting an audience next week. But then, yes, when we're suddenly at, in a basketball court in Woolwich or under a flyover in Thamesmead, and the idea of 60 people joining us and sitting in a circle. And I mean, the configuration is important for me as well, that in the street, the idea of it being in the round feels, very democratic, and it feels very like what happens in the street. If you see something happen, you don't all form a big line, an orderly line. You make a circle, and that circle feels like a very democratic way of sharing the work on the street, yeah.
And it often makes it more interactive, and this is an interactive show, isn't it? How is that working?
It is, yeah. Well, that's interesting as well, because obviously we made it very much with the notion that the audiences would participate, join in, and so finding our version of that in kind of COVID times has been very interesting. But I think sometimes, the last few days, it's provoked some quite interesting ways of how we might get the audience involved in the piece and interacting in the piece. Fundamentally, for my money, and this does connect to a lot of comedy for me, and obviously comedy is at the heart of a lot of our work. I think one of the biggest things is making an audience feel comfortable and relaxed, because if an audience isn't comfortable and relaxed, they won't laugh.
Yeah.
And I think in these times we live in, we've got to make sure that more than ever that they feel comfortable to come out and sit and watch what we're doing. And not only, I think, that they are aware that we have taken certain measures, but for me, it's also about how we integrate the idea of social distancing into the piece itself. So we found a lot of the the sort of new material, comic material, comes out of social distancing and that restriction in a sense. So I'm hoping that audiences will recognise that because they're living with it, and we kind of have some fun with it as well at the same time.
Yeah, we put a review up today, actually, of a pantomime that's out of doors down in the southwest, where they do a lot, like panto. You know, panto does play a lot on the moment and what's going on.
Of course. Yes.
So there's a lot of comedy, I suppose, in what we've all been forced to do, isn't there?
Yes, exactly. And I think sometimes, because we work largely from improvisation with our work, all improvisation comes out of some kind of restriction.
Yeah.
You know, it's virtually impossible to improvise if you don't have restriction. You find more when you're limited in a strange way. So the actual restrictions we're used to all the time, in a sense. It's just a different type of restriction for us.
Yeah.
And I think everyone's embracing it, which is exciting, yeah.
So Get Happy, it's a family show. It's aimed at young children as well. So what's it actually about? What happens?
Get Happy is, it was inspired by, we made it first in 2013 when my little boy was about 3 years old. And like most parents, I was fascinated with the way his imagination was working and developing. And I liked the fact that, I was interested in the fact that he could get very interested in something and then immediately forget that and get interested in something else. And I thought, I'd love to make a piece that kind of responds to that imagination, that doesn't have a story, doesn't have a clear narrative. It's just a collection of sketches which hopefully connect in some way, but are in themselves hopefully entertaining. So that was the genesis. And then I started looking at three things which kind of influenced the piece, which was the work of this sounds an odd influence in a way, but the work of the German choreographer Pina Bausch and her dance theatre company, a particular book by Dr. Seuss called Go Dog Go, children's book, and the work of Charlie Chaplin, in particular a film called The Kid. And those three kind of influences stylistically informed how we started to create these sketches, really. But yes, it's a kind of contemporary family variety show that mixes physical comedy, live music, and hip-hop.
Right.
But in a sense, the only kind of rule we gave ourselves was, if we in the room enjoyed the particular sketch we were doing, it was in. If we didn't, then it wasn't in. So, and then it's got very little language. It's very accessible. There's a tiny amount of text, and it's proved a show that's gone to. We did it twice at the Barbican. We were at the Beijing Comedy Festival in China, and then Luxembourg, and now, as I say, a basketball court in Woolwich. So it feels like something that could go anywhere.
Yeah, it sounds like I can see the link between that and the last of your shows that I saw your Charlie Chaplin and Stan Laurel when you went up to Manchester.
Oh, right, at home, yes. Well, actually, one of the performers, Jerome Marsh-Reed, played Stan in that show and has joined us for this. And so, yes, of course, you will, if you've seen that show, it's very different, but there are certain principles, of course. I mean, obviously, Charlie and Stan is a very physical show and has no spoken word at all, of course. But there's certainly a kind of aesthetic that links our work, and certainly that show was a big show for us. It was very successful, and then sadly was interrupted by the COVID. Although luckily we got to within 2 weeks of the end of the tour, I suppose. But you've seen that, then yes, this won't come as an enormous surprise. If anything, it's slightly madder. I think Get Happy. It's a kind of it makes me think at times of sort of Dickory's and Bob Mortimer and that kind of very anarchic wildness, but yes, no, it's certainly linked. Yeah,
sound like my sort of thing. But yeah, you come back to Chaplin again. You mentioned Chaplin about this one. Your company's known for physical comedy, has been since nearly 30 years now. So what is it about Chaplin and that type of comedy that appealed to you, that stayed with you?
I think like lots of people of my generation, early 50s, I think I grew up through my parents watching them, Stan and Ollie and Charlie Chaplin when I was little. And to be fair, when I was younger, I wasn't so interested in Chaplin. I was much more taken with Stan and Ollie, I suppose, and their relationship. And I it was only as I got older and I got more into performing that I returned to Chaplin. And I think, obviously he was an extraordinary, in terms of directing and composing music and creating this extraordinary character. But I think that obviously there's something about the universality of his work and what he does with it and how he mixes comedy with sentiment, and also how all of those routines came out of the music halls. You know what I mean? When he went to America, as we did in our show, we touched on his journey to America with Carno's group and Stan. And Stan came back, but Chaplin moved out to California at the beginning of the movies. I was always fascinated by the fact that a lot of this material looked brand new, but most of it he pinched or done as a young kid in music hall in South London and around the country. So for me, it goes back to a style of physical performing that's, in its essence, again, comes back to the street in a way, right back to, Commedia dell'arte and those Italian companies who would pitch up in a town square 400 years ago with a cart and perform there. It goes right back to that. And I think we've always been a company, and obviously I'm directing this, but I still perform. And I think if we celebrate anything, we celebrate the role of the performer, I think. So I think there's something about that for me that, yes, Chaplin's an extraordinary director and one of the great directors, but he was an amazing performer. And I think that's the link, really, is performance.
Yeah. It was interesting putting, as soon as I heard the title of the other show, putting Chaplin and Laurel together, apart from the fact that they didn't know each other, they did meet, and they'd worked together in England. They were both really meticulous with their comedy. They treated it very, very seriously, didn't they? And they were brilliantly creative.
Oh, my God. Absolutely. Oh, my God, of course. And I think that's been people find, surprising about Stan, for instance, because, of course, he's a brilliant clown. Yeah. But he was the artistic driving force behind the double act. Yeah. I mean, Ollie was obviously brilliant, but once it finished, he wanted to go and play golf or go and put some money on the horses. You know what I mean? It was whereas Stan was constantly working the material and, working with the directors and Hal Roach and Chaplin. I mean, I can't imagine it was a walk in the park to work for Chaplin. I'm sure it was.
No.
I'm sure he was incredibly controlling. And actually, that's what we touch on, of course, in Charlie and Stan, is that early relationship where he may have felt slightly threatened by how good Stan was. You know what I mean? Yeah. But yeah, I mean, two extraordinary. And I've always really loved and admired the skill of performers. People who can create things as well, not just interpret something, but can come up with material. And I think sometimes performers come up with, this isn't to negate writers, of course it isn't, but I think sometimes performers can come up with stuff that writers don't, if you sort of mean. Yeah. There's a performer's imagination that I find very interesting to liberate in a room. That's always been our aim, is to try and not tell actors what to do, but to provoke them to come up with something. That's the key for me, not just to, if you liberate their imagination, you're more likely to get something interesting, I think. And so, again, we're very lucky with the four that we've got in the room at the moment,
Yeah, watching Devise perform, sometimes there are certain things that give away that it's Devise, some bad and some good. And on the good side, it's when you see something, a company like The Right Size, which who you work with. Yeah. I remember seeing their Do You Come Here Often, when they were stuck in a bathroom for 30 years. And there are elements of that where you think nobody could have thought of that, sat down with a piece of paper and written it down. It's something that you can only really come up with by doing, isn't it?
I think that, that show is, for me, is would be my top 10 shows of all time. I think.
Me too, yeah.
Masterpiece. But you're absolutely right. I mean, some of the way their imagination worked as a double act, a writer they might write something brilliant, but they wouldn't write that. No. And how they bounced off each other. And also, I think it's interesting, we're often drawn to this, is that the starting, but not so much in Get Happy, but indeed in Charlie and Stan's show, I think sometimes we're often drawn to starting points that are quite dark. Yeah. Now, with Sean and Hamish, when they made Do You Come Here Often, their starting point was the book about the Beirut hostages, Brian Keenan, and when they were, and I remember talking to them and said, "Is that what you started with?" Yes, we started with exactly that book, and I thought that is very interesting. They took a harrowing account of hostages in Beirut and created these two men stuck in a bathroom. Yes. And I think sometimes people think, to make something funny, you've got to start from a funny place, and I'm not so sure. I think sometimes it's good to go to a place that is more uncomfortable and darker to liberate what you're doing. But thank you for reminding me of that show. I'm currently writing some stuff about shows that I've seen over the last 30 years, and you've reminded me I have to write about that, because that was a brilliant piece. And in some ways, I think, obviously they went on to great success, didn't they, with the Morecambe and Wise show? Yes, which I was in for a while. Yeah. And it was wonderful being part of that. But I think for me, some of their best work was when it was the two of them, literally stuck together. Because of course it was about being a double act as well. But anyway, that's enough of them. They're brilliant.
So do you have a regular process of working, of creating work?
I think there are certain principles that remain, or a kind of aesthetic that we remain interested in, but there's no kind of set way of working. No, there's no model, if you like. I think it's all about the idea, and then it's all about the people who are in that room with you, and that defines the style in a way. And I think we've always been very wary of getting stuck in some kind of formula.
Yeah.
And sometimes people, producers of ours have felt we've sometimes shot ourselves in the foot, because when we've had a successful show, we haven't toured it forever, and our desire has been to create something new. And then when we've created something new, it's not like the thing that went before.
Yeah. And
so some people are a bit disappointed and go, oh God, it's not that thing we like them doing. But I think for us to keep going the amount of time we have and to stay interested, it's important to shake it up a bit. So I sometimes feel if it feels like we're repeating, we tend to kick against that a bit. So it's usually the thing that binds us is, some key principles like trying to inhabit the space between laughter and pain has always fascinated us.
Yeah. And
we've never been particularly interested in trying to create reality on stage. We will always have the opinion that film and TV will do that much better than we can. But it's not really a style. No, the process changes all the time, really, yeah.
Do you think the nature of the work that you produce has changed at all over the past 27 years?
Wow, that's a good question. Inevitably, I suppose, because I've changed as well, of course, and we've changed as a company. I think in some ways, maybe at times it's got a bit purer in some of the shows. Like, as I said, in the Charlie Chaplin, Stan Laurel show, I think the notion, we ended up making that without words because we thought, well, let's make our version of a silent movie. Yeah. I think the thing that maybe changed certainly over the last 10 years is a desire of ours, where possible, to work with people who are not theatre makers or don't work in theatre.
Right.
I think we've really enjoyed being provoked by people who come from a very different background, whether it's a jazz pianist like Zoe Rahman, who wrote the live piano score for the Chaplin show, or the poet laureate Simon Armitage, who wrote the libretto for a musical movie called I Am Thomas. And I just find that very interesting, that suddenly in the room are people who don't come from that same discipline. Because sometimes they're not bound by things either. We might say, oh no, you can't do that, we never do that. And they sometimes go, well, why can't you? I remember Simon Armitage saying that in his rather blunt Yorkshire way. And I went, oh, I don't know. We just haven't done it. And I think you can get slightly called out by people, which I think is really healthy. And Simon, he's a good friend and he's very funny the way he does it. But I thought, actually, that's really healthy. I've sort of said that because I think I believe it. But when he called me out on it, I've gone, maybe it doesn't matter, you don't have to cling on to it, so to speak. But I think that often, as I said, comes from people who are not bound by the discipline of theatre. You know what I mean? They don't necessarily, it's not their world. And even with improvisation, when we first worked with Zoe Rahman years ago, we did a show called I'm a Fool to Want You, which was about a French writer and jazz musician, Boris Vian. And I wanted two jazz musicians in the show. And then we had two of our actors who were very good improvisers. But what Zoe brought was the improvisation of a jazz musician, of course, and her relentless pursuit of not repeating herself. So every time she played something, it was never the same. I think we learned masses from. I think we learned to be bolder as improvisers from working with Zoe. Because, yes, she might do that tune, so she's riffing around the tune, but it's never the same. Yeah. And I thought, actually, that's quite good. That stopped us, I think, or it pushed us more into the sense of taking more risks when we improvised, I suppose. But as I said, I think that was because she came from a different place,
Yeah. I was reading on your website an interesting story about you learnt to be spontaneous by acting with a live duck back a few decades ago. Yes,
that was I suppose that did certainly put me on the back foot, the front foot, on everything. Yeah. I mean, I think it was strange because I was a very young performer then. I didn't know what I was doing, and I I hadn't been long out of year or so out of drama school. And, you're going to Edinburgh trying to do something, and I'd done a show, or been asked to do a show, which was an amalgamation of the Fools of Shakespeare, and then me sort of planning in between. And it did okay, and I learned masses by doing it, and then they asked me the next year, and I thought, I don't want to do the same thing. And someone had said to me, why don't you work with an animal? And I thought, well, that's interesting. So then when I started to think about an animal, I don't want it to be a dog or a... And then I remember going to visit someone a guy who had a kind of cockerel, but the cockerel looked quite psychotic. When I actually met the bird, I thought, I'm not working with this very unstable relationship. And then the key was when someone said that if you get a duckling very, very young, it will bond to you like you're its mother. And I did a bit of research on that, and then I went and got this duck from a farm, so it was literally a day old. And sure enough, once I got it back to my flat in Tufnell Park, it connected to me. So, whenever I walk, it would follow me. And we built the show in which she came into the show. Even though I look back on it, and I didn't know what I was doing really, I think there were key principles which I think I realized early on was important. Was things like I knew it was important, I don't know why, but I knew it was important that I must never be higher status than the duck. I thought it's really important that I'm not the smart aleck here. Do you know what I mean? And then the other part of me thought, also, I need to have a relationship with it which, in some ways, is more like a married couple than me and my pet. So once I'd had those two, and the director pushed me, so once I had those two ideas, it meant that when the duck unexpectedly entered, I just talked to the duck like it was my girlfriend. And, I'd say, well, you can't keep coming to work. I said, I'm coming straight home. I'm not going to the pub after. And I thought that was the key. The duck, Adela, was always more powerful than me. So I don't know. I've often thought about doing something again, because it's in terms of putting you in the moment, and nothing did it more than that. But yeah, that was an early journey into the world of spontaneity, for sure.
Status is so important to comedy, isn't it? I remember being taught status on my theatre degree by looking at somebody slipping on a banana skin, and it's that sudden drop in status. It's got to be somebody who's high status to start with. You can't have a homeless person slipping on a banana skin. It's got to be somebody.
Exactly the same with Chaplin.
Yeah.
In that, when there's different ways of looking at it, he would often talk about, it might be called The Immigrant. It's an early film of his when he escaped from prison. But there's a scene in that in which he's eating an ice cream, and he drops this ice cream sundae, cold ice cream sundae, down off a balcony, down this posh woman's back of her dress. Yeah. And it's very funny. Yeah. And he said, a bit like you're saying, but the opposite way around, he said it wouldn't be funny if that was a cleaning woman. Exactly. And that ice cream told that was. We wouldn't laugh then. Yeah. But we laugh at the slightly snooty woman who's, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I think those principles are very, very key, I think. Yeah. Audiences can very quickly go, oh, no, I'm not sure about it. It's interesting as well when you say that, because it makes me think of the Stan and Charlie show again, because I don't know if you remember, there's a moment in the show in which Charlie's on his own and he gets a woman out of the audience to swim with him in our show. They do it. Yes. And I thought Amalia, who played Charlie, was obviously absolutely brilliant. But I think every time I saw that, every venue we went to, Amalia always managed to get usually a middle-aged woman up with her to swim across with the audience. And it was one of the best moments of the show. And I'm sure that one of the reasons that was possible is because the woman knew it was a woman playing Chaplin. Right. And as a result, I think they felt safer. Yeah. We talked about this a lot. I think if that had been a man playing Chaplin, I think women might have been more reluctant because they don't know if they're going to be the mickey taken out of them, or do you know what I mean? Yeah. Whereas because it's being played by a woman, I think they could trust her more. And I think that, for me, theatre still, for me, is a place where you're trying to get, as I said, I come back to an audience relaxing. You want to challenge them at the same time as putting them in a safe place to take them on whatever journey you're taking them on. And we're always, in a sense, in our work, we're constantly searching for moments where we say to the audience very clearly, we're going to turn right. And if we do that, you can bet your bottom dollar we're going to turn left. So we're constantly trying to play with that trust and surprise an audience. But I also think, I passionately believe this, theatre is a place where anyone can play anything and anything is possible. Yeah. You know, when Jerome came in to meet me for the part of Stan, And he's a very honest, straightforward lad, John. I'm really very fond of him. And he hasn't done an enormous amount, but he said, I was just surprised when my agent rang and said they want to see you for the part of Stan Laurel. He said, because I thought I'd never get seen for that part. Now, I think it is utterly pointless to try and cast someone who looks like Stan Laurel. Otherwise, you might as well go and watch the film, or
yes.
you know what I mean, or their own film. And theatre is a place where it's about the spirit. If you have something of the spirit of that person, it's much more interesting to cast someone different. That's why, for me, Amalia is a brilliant Chaplin. Yeah. Because, yes, you put an enormous amount of research, hours of research outside of the rehearsal room on his movement quality, which he captures and nails amazingly. Yeah. But she has something of the spirit of Charlie. Yeah. But you never forget it's a woman. Do you know what I mean?
No.
That's what I think is interesting. You can invest in something wholeheartedly as an audience and at the same time know that it's false. Yeah. And I think that is the thing that only theatre can do.
Yeah.
I don't think film can do it. I don't think telly can do it. Theatre is the only form where you can do that.
Yeah. You do some teaching, I notice, on the website, and you teach a 5-day intensive, you personally, on the role of the director in the devising process. So what, obviously not over 5 days, but what's, briefly, is the role of the director in the devising process? Well, is it more of a referee?
No, well, sometimes. It came about because years ago, we've done it about 13 years now, about 15 years ago, I was chatting to a friend of mine, an actor my age, and I said, what have you done? He said, I've just done a devised show. I said, how was it? He said, terrible. He said, I'm fed up of going in rooms with someone's got an idea, a director, and has no way of making it happen or facilitating it, and then all the actors come up with everything. Yeah. And I thought, this is a complaint I've heard a lot from my generation of actors, particularly younger directors. Yes. And because we've made a good amount of shows by then from nothing or from a tiny kernel of an idea, I thought, well, we could share some. I'm not saying it's the only way, but we could certainly make something which shares our process of what that role is as the director from our perspective. And it basically looks at, a bit like I said earlier, it looks at the idea of initially creating a playful and creative atmosphere in a room, which I'm amazed some directors don't even think about. When I work with some directors, it doesn't even cross their mind. And I think I personally get more ideas if I feel that I'm in a creative and relaxed environment. I don't create very well under pressure. So I look at various ways of doing that. I also look at ways of how the directors can provoke the performers rather than, as I said, telling them what to do. Yeah. I don't think devising is about you just telling. Otherwise, write a script if you're just going to tell them what to do. If you get the right performers, what you want is the beginnings of an idea and a structure, and then you want to provoke them to get their imagination on what the material is. And also, it's kind of sharing the notion as well that as a director, you don't need to have all the answers. No. A confident position to take is sometimes to say, I don't know. Yeah. But a lot of directors are terrified to say that. Yeah. Whereas if you say it in the right way, it can come across as a very confident position. And also, actors will sniff someone blagging it a mile off. Actors are very good at that. If someone's trying to spin them, you know what I mean? Whereas if you're confident enough to go, do you know, I don't know for the moment. We'll find out. Yeah. Don't know what's going to happen next. So yes, it kind of shares that. And look, I mean, it's one of my favourite weeks of the year. I love doing it. And it's always a fascinating week. But it's just, giving people sharing some experience. And I think it's, especially now, even more so now, when we're all kind of struggling to get going and create stuff, I think we have a real duty to share things and, you know, communicate with each other and not just be in our own bubble. I know we have to be in a bubble because of the pandemic. Yes. But I think more, and I think particularly when you reach kind of the point that we're at and our generation, I think you have a responsibility for the people coming up and trying stuff. It's hard. It's much harder now than when I started. Yeah. And I think you definitely owe it to that generation to go, I wouldn't dream of telling them what to do, but to be there in whatever way you can. I think that's what the teaching's fundamentally about. Yeah. Yeah.
I was just thinking when you were talking there about you creating the rehearsal room, I was thinking when I saw the Chaplin and Laurel play, it reminded me a bit of some of Mike Sheppard's work at Knee-High, yes, where the set looks like a playground. It looks like something where the actors have been sent to play.
Yep. I think that's exactly That's exactly right. I think the notion of a playground is something that we absolutely commit to. And interestingly, with Knee-High, our dear friends of ours, and if we have a strong link to any other company, it's Knee-High in terms of the crossover of, we've worked with a lot of their guys, I've worked with them a lot, and we're very different in our approach. Yeah. But I think there's a philosophy that I absolutely tap into that Mike brings to their work, and I also think, we talked about the Right Size earlier. I think it's been very interesting, the journey they've gone on, the amazing work that Emma did with them and now has her own company. Yeah. But I remember the first show, I think it was the first show that Mike directed post Emma leaving, which I thought was absolutely terrific, which was this Carl Gross wrote with them, this version of the Beggar's Opera, Dead Dog in a Suitcase, and other love songs. And I thought it was wonderful. I remember ringing him and going, it's so refreshing to see a political piece of theatre that is completely theatrical. That's what I loved about it. Yeah. It was I thought it was searingly political and very of the moment, but it never forgot it was theatre. And I think sometimes the tendency in Britain, when you go to something more political, is people feel in order to communicate their idea, they have to go to something like psychological realism or naturalism as a form. Yeah. And you don't have to do that. You can do something wildly theatrical and actually make the political point even stronger, I would add. And that's an example I loved that show. I thought I did it very, very profoundly, I thought. Yeah,
because I went up to Liverpool and I interviewed Mike about it while he was still rehearsing for it in Liverpool. And he's the politics of it, he made very clear in the interview, but it certainly comes through and without banging on about it.
No, and it's very entertaining.
Very entertaining, yes.
It's a really entertaining night out, and I don't see any contradiction there either.
No.
I think people often in theatre, use the word entertainment and it's a slightly sniffy word, and I think no. I remember seeing a poster, an old poster in a bookshop a while ago in Hastings, and it was for Graham Greene's Brighton Rock. Yeah. And on the poster it said Brighton Rock, an entertainment by Graham Greene. And I thought, that's brilliant. If it's good enough for Graham Greene, I'm going to put that on the poster for our next show. Because that's fundamentally what you are also trying to do, is to entertain.
Well, even Brecht said that, which a lot of directors at Brecht forget.
I couldn't agree more. Absolutely, Brecht said that. And I don't know if years ago, we spoke about them earlier, the Right Size did a wonderful version of Mr. Puntilla and his man Matty. Yeah. And that, that was the funniest Brecht I've seen. It was properly funny as well. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. You really laughed when they were doing the Brecht. I thought, yes, somewhere up there, I imagine Brecht would really like this version of it,
Yes. Probably wouldn't admit it, but he would have liked it. Your style of performing is very physical. It's very physical comedy. Now, you said before you're in your 50s like me, so does that get more difficult as you get older?
Oh, yes, for sure. In the cast of Get Happy, a friend of mine who's been with us for a long time, he's my age, and the show is, we've reduced the length of the show for outdoors just because of attention span and all of that. But it's a very physical, as I said, there's a lot of hip hop. It it ends with a big can routine. And I saw him this morning on the way into work, and I said, he said, I feel every one of my 53 years. So, and we actually have a line in the show which I really like, where our pianist and performer who's on the microphone, there's a moment where Steve, the actor I'm referring to, carries off both of the two younger performers, the woman sitting on his head and the man wrapped around his waist. And it's quite impressive. And as he goes, the solo on the piano goes, he is 53. That man there, carrying the two others. And, of course, he comes on indignant. And so there's always a sense of acknowledging that. But, yes, I think you have to look after yourself. I mean, one of the things that few positive things that have come out of COVID is that my tennis has got better. So I've been playing quite a lot of tennis because I think that it's harder when you go into a room for sure. And that's also why I like very diverse and mixed rooms. I don't want to be in a room where everyone looks like me or is the same age as me. I want theatre to look like life. Do you know what I mean? But yes, if you're at the older end, I suppose it's like the senior players in a football team. I should probably have to work harder and whatever, but that's okay.
And there was a report I noticed we published earlier this year that you're back to your roots in Birmingham with becoming an associate of Birmingham Rep in March, and back to half of the Right Size as well, back to Sean. Yes,
no, it's very lovely actually. I weirdly, having left Birmingham at kind of 17, 18, And for some reason, that happens, I suppose. Of all the places I've toured, I'd never really played Birmingham very much. We didn't tour there. We played Liverpool loads, Manchester, and all over. And then the previous artistic director, Roxana, when she did her first show, she did a version of Tartuffe with Mark Williams playing Tartuffe, and she asked me to play organ, and I went back to Birmingham the first time in years. And I really loved it. It was really, really, great to strangely go home, Yeah. Even though where I lived had become much more gentrified, even had a Waitrose, I thought, blimey, what's happened here? But I liked the building. I liked the people there. And then, of course, when Sean took over, that took me right back. He's an old pal. And he came and said, what about, you and the company becoming an associate? And I just like the vibe. I like what they're trying to do at the Rep, and I like the vibe of the city. There's a lot of young artists in loads of different disciplines making stuff. And so I was thrilled. And I'm hoping, if we can get through this time, that we'll do some interesting stuff there. I mean, brilliantly, if hopefully it happens, Birmingham has the Commonwealth Games in 2022. So if that does happen, I'm hoping that the Rep will be at the centre of a cultural programme of work, and we can be part of that. But it's and I don't know. I think for me, being a Brummie, if I think back to, we talked about comedy. If I think back to things that have made me laugh, some of the biggest things that made me laugh are my brother and his mates in the pub. The kind of very dry Brummie sense of humour that I've always, when I go back, I thought, no, that's the time I laughed most. So it's nice being around that again. Yeah.
Yeah. So I know everything's very uncertain at the moment, but beyond I've noticed you're doing some online consultancy on Zoom or something. But have you got any other tentative plans for after this show?
Well, it's not. I suppose it is a little bit of a manifesto. But I wrote something with our producer the other day, which is called "Staying Live," not "Staying Alive." The Bee Gees are "Staying Live," and I just think the fact that we've managed to get this on has really made me recommit to the notion of what it means to be live. And it's partly a reaction to so much stuff that is filmed, and I understand why people are filming theatre and showing it, and all of that I understand. But that's not theatre. You know what I mean? Theatre is about a group of people doing something in the same place that another group of people are, whether that's the street or wherever. So I suppose, yes, I've got a couple of thoughts knocking about around how we might try and do something else that keeps it live. But some of that stuff is also trying to work out how, for instance, we can do the role of the director workshop in the same space. Because it takes a lot of planning nowadays. Normally I'd have 20 people. I can't do it with 20 people in a space. We've got to do it with less people and make that. But I'd rather do that in the same space than trying to do it on Zoom. I want it to be in a room together, So if you watch this space, I'm sure there'll be some stuff coming up once we get Happy out of the way. But I think we've got to stay live somehow. I think whatever it is that your work you make, for us, it's kind of crucial. So we've made this happen. I'm sure we can do some more.
That was Paul Hunter of Told by an Idiot, whose show Get Happy will feature in the Greenwich+Docklands International Festival with performances at Woolwich Common Basketball Court on the 29th of August, the Moorings Estate in Thamesmead on the 30th of August, and Eltham on the 12th of September 2020. For more information, see www.festival.org/GDIF or www.toldbyanidiot.org. You've been listening to a podcast from British Theatre Guide. For more information, please visit britishtheatreguide.info.